All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the penultimate day of the amazing 36th Annual ANJEE Conference. My name is Mike Shodroff. I am the co-president of ANJEE. Also with me today from ANJEE is my co-president, Kelly Wenzel, and also Beth Stolting, ANJEE's Director of Operations and Development. We're really excited to have everybody here this evening, like I said, as we begin to conclude ANJEE's 36th Annual Winter Conference. Also, thank you to the generosity of a few sponsors. This year's conference was completely free of charge. We tried to make it as accessible to everybody. So a special thank you to our friends at PSEG, New Jersey Natural Gas, and our anonymous donor, who is a friend of science and environmental education in New Jersey. As well, this particular panel is being sponsored by New Jersey Clean Energy Program. They are an organizational member and have become a really good friend of ANJEE. So New Jersey Clean Energy Program would like me to actually say a big thank you, a sincere thank you to all the attendees for attending this year's conference and for supporting clean energy and sustainability in New Jersey. New Jersey's Clean Energy Program is dedicated to helping residents and businesses find solutions at everyday energy efficiency needs. For information about their program, please visit their website at njcleanenergy.com, which we're going to drop in the chat box. Please contact them directly if you have any questions or to schedule a presentation or a webinar for your organization. I also want to quickly share with you their awesome little commercial.
It's time to save, New Jersey. New Jersey's Clean Energy Program is your guide to rebates and incentives that can save hundreds, even thousands of dollars for businesses and residents throughout the state by making smarter energy choices. Start today with an energy assessment. We're lighting the way to a clean energy future. Join in at njcleanenergy.com or call 866-NJ-SMART.
All right. And I just want to give a quick shout out. I see Carrie Ann from New Jersey Clean Energy Program is with us. So again, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. We're also, I just want to let you know, we're going to place our YouTube channel in the chat room. There you can find workshops from our autumn conference, which were also made available thanks to New Jersey Clean Energy Program. And eventually the keynote speeches and workshops from this winter conference will be there. We hope that you subscribe because we will continue to put up content for anybody who would like it. And just a few reminders for this session. We ask that everyone keep themselves on mute throughout the presentation. If you do have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat room. We'll be monitoring that. And there will be a time for live Q&A after Dr. Hall speaks. And, we will call on you to make it as participatory as possible. So let's indeed get started with tonight's keynote. Dr. Maurice Hall is a dean and professor of communications at the School of Arts and Communication at the College of New Jersey in Ewing. He has written several book chapters and scholarly essays for academic journals such as Howard Journal of Communications and Management Communication Quarterly on topics related to leadership, cross-cultural communication, and the post-colonial culture of Jamaica. Dr. Hall has won awards for both teaching and research, including a Sharing a Best Book Award in 2012 for reconstructing place and space, media, power, and identity in the Constitution of a Caribbean Diaspora. He is on the editorial board of Management Communication Quarterly. Dr. Hall has consulted with a variety of organizations over the past 15 years on issues ranging from diversity management to leadership training. Tonight, Dr. Hall will be answering the question, how are we to understand and encourage the activism of students in the age of discourses about political correctness, cancel culture, and polarization? This presentation will focus on the tools and resources for communication and activism with an eye to maximizing the impact of social movements for social justice. I have had the privilege of getting to know Dr. Hall just a little bit better in preparation for tonight's talk. I attended a forum hosted by Civic Story a few months ago, and within a minute of hearing him speak, I knew he needed to address our alliance. So it is with great gratitude and great pleasure that I introduce everybody to Dr. Maurice Hall.
Thank you so much, Michael, for those very kind words. Thank you, and it is wonderful to be here. And I want you to know that I am also here with one of our students, Haley Wright, and Haley will talk a little bit later. But I'm so thankful, Haley, that you're able to join me tonight during this presentation. So let me just say a little bit about what I want to do tonight. I want to talk to us about the idea of what it means for our young people to be involved in activism and how we can help them do that well. But I also want to talk about the discourses that purport to describe what that activism looks like, often in very negative terms. And so my hope is that if there are students on the call, that this will be inspiring to them. And that for those of us who are parents and educators, for those of us who work with young people in different ways, that this will be a call to action to support them as they do important work. And I am going to share my screen with you, and I promised everybody before I started, so I'm going to share my screen. It worked really well in the rehearsal, and I promise you once I do it for real, it's going to go crazy. So I'll begin with uttering three names. Amanda Gorman, David Hogg, Greta Thunberg. We know these names. Amanda, from the wonderful poem that she did for the current president's inauguration. David, because of his activism around gun rights in the aftermath of Stoneman Douglas High School coming under attack. Greta, for the work she has done worldwide on climate and environment. We know their names because these names have stood out to us as young people who are passionate, who are articulate, who lead a new generation of young people in helping us think about ways in which we can address some of the issues in the world that we are bequeathing to them. But before I talk more about those young people and people like them, I also want to say for people on the call, especially for students, that there are also ways in which you can be an activist and you can be extraordinary and not necessarily be known by people across the world. When I was asked about tonight's presentation and the opportunity to donate to an organization, the first person that came to mind is a young man that I know very well. His parents may be on the call. They're from Jamaica. His name is Niall Rivers Stewart. I've known his parents forever. We grew up together. We were like family, we still are. He stayed in my house many a year. And Niall, I wanted to honor his memory because he struck me as the kind of young person who many of us may not hear about on the news. We may not see leading demonstrations, but has an incredible impact on the world simply because of who he is. I asked his parents to talk a little bit about sort of what they wanted me to remember about him. He passed away a few years ago from a really horrible battle with cancer. One of the things that they said was that, and I'm going to read their words because I want to get it exactly right. Now I was concerned about the environment and wanted to participate in things like beach cleanups. His passion, however, was people, was making their lives better. That's why he chose to do physiotherapy. He thought that it would allow him to connect particularly with the elderly. They had a special place in his heart. And so he spent a lot of his time doing high school community service. He would make trips to nursing homes so that he could look after the older ladies there. And he said, in reply to his mom asking why he would do that, It doesn't cost me anything, he said, to spend a little time with them, and they look forward to the visits. If I can make them smile a little, that's good, right? He was passionate about enjoying life. He was the person who was wonderful with his friends, but what struck me about him more than anything else was that for the times where he was staying at my house with his family, he was quiet, he was kind, he touched people and had an impact just because of who he was, as he expressed his authentic self. And just because he lived fully in the truth of who he was with and for those around him. And so even though he has passed away, I still remember him. He has still touched my life. He has shown me more than anything else, not just what it is like to pass away in a manner that's unfortunate, but more importantly, what it's like to live and to live fully. And I wanted to begin with that because I wanted to balance the idea that, yes, there are young people who, because of their force of personality and where they happen to find themselves, become well known, become a household name for whatever reason. But there are countless others. And I want to say to those young people on the call who may be hearing me, there are countless others who many people may never know your name, may never know what you do. And yet you are impactful just because of the fact that you're doing it. And you're impactful just because of the fact that you're doing it as you. And I think that is a lesson that Nile has left with me that will be really important. So I wanted to talk about an anecdote. During a recent interview on the TV program Fox and Friends, the then White House advisor, Jared Kushner, made the following comment. He was talking about issues of social justice, and he was talking about issues of race and why it was so difficult to wrestle with these issues. And he said, the thing we've seen in the Black community, which is mostly Democrat, is that President Trump's policies are the policies that can help people break out of the problems that they're complaining about, but he can't want them to be successful more than they want to be successful themselves. Now, I'm not lifting this example up as an example of anything particularly political, though this has political implications. The reason I'm lifting this example up is because it got a lot of attention. It was said by an advisor in the White House, and it was, of course, for obvious reasons, quite controversial. And it was controversial because, on the one hand, in many ways, it reflected the kind of story that didn't necessarily reflect what we knew to be true of social science. And it reflected the kind of story that in many ways did not reflect all the data. There's no credible social science research that asserts that inequality in this country is simply about personal motivation. And so it seemed to counteract the claims made by a very influential advisor to the president. So I lift that example up, not because of who said it, but because it's probably the most recent example of a topic that garnered a lot of political attention, to ask the question, when we are faced with comments or systems or examples that strike us as unjust, that strike us as problematic, that strike us as reinforcing rather than helping a problem, what is the appropriate way to respond? How do we address that? Whether it is the responses we've seen to the death of George Floyd, or the horrible, horrible environmental, cultural devastation that we saw in Flint, Michigan, as a result of the events there. How do we respond to this in a way that expresses our outrage, but that expresses our ability to fix it? And how do we respond in ways that get people to hear us? There's been lots of conversation and lots of controversy across the country around this idea of cancel culture. And the idea of cancel culture is that on college campuses today and among young people today, they are intolerant. You can't say anything. You can't make any criticisms without them wanting to cancel you. They are illiberal. And in fact, an author has actually done a book where he talked about the illiberality of college campuses. And often this discourse describes our students, describes our young people as poorly read, intolerant, not willing to hear views that are different than their own, ready to push a diatribe and don't want to hear the opposite side. And I wanted to push back on that. I wanted to push back on that because I've been a professor for more than 20-something years. I wanted to push back on that because I thought it was unfair to many of the wonderful young people that I have met and that I've worked with. And I wanted to push back on that because I think it's a question. In the face of something that strikes young people as unjust, that strikes them as problematic, that strikes them as profoundly unfair, should they not have the right to push back forcefully, whether it's on speech that is erroneous or problematic, or on policies that they think will be devastatingly harmful? And when they do, how do we as educators, as parents, as members of communities, support them in ways that allow the response to be productive, but also allow it to reflect the character of who they are, right? We are wrestling with this in this country. How do we respond to issues that are problematic, that are incendiary? How do we balance free speech with the recognition that depending on who is speaking, speech can actually reinforce ideas or perceptions that have long-term effects that are harmful and really problematic effects that are harmful. And of course, as I thought would be true, my wonderful screen has stopped moving forward. And so I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and then I'm going to come back into it and move it from there, because it tends to do this. Okay, here we go. So I want us to wrestle with this question because in many ways, this question sort of undergirds sort of who many of our young people are. I read a really interesting article in the Chronicle of Higher Education some months ago. It was authored by Jeffrey Selingo, who is a higher education specialist. And this is the argument he made. He said, for our schools and for our colleges, we have to be prepared for a different generation of young people who are coming. The previous generation was often concerned about sort of balancing different elements of their lives with family, having some sense of downtime, having a sense of balance in their lives. He said, however, this generation is the most diverse generation in modern American history. Today's students are attentive to inclusion across race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and they want schools, and I would add communities, and I would add movements, to live up to those ideals as well, in part because many of them have grown up in very, very diverse communities where they are used to people of all different backgrounds being with them, in part because they're connected to young people across the world. One of the most extraordinary experiences I had, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, was traveling to Cape Town, South Africa. Cape Town, South Africa, in the aftermath of Nelson Mandela, whom we all know as an icon, has experienced cultural, political, and social turmoil. For those who have been there, you know it's an unbelievably beautiful country. You know Cape Town is an amazing city in South Africa. But it has also been the space where for years there has been lots of unrest, lots of social issues that remain unresolved. And on this particular trip, I happened to find myself in one of the townships surrounded by many of the young people who themselves were on the front lines of activism for a wide variety of issues like access to higher education and so forth. And here's the thing that struck me. As I was talking to these young people, they were telling me stories about connecting on Facebook and Instagram with young people, African Americans and others in the United States. And they were sharing stories back and forth about issues of police mistreatment, issues about access to education or lack thereof, issues of confronting their lives. They were sharing on a global platform the similar kinds of experiences they've had together. So this generation of young people, in part because of social media, aren't just connected to people who are like them, who are in their communities. They're connected to young people across the world. And in fact, can generate responses through social movements because of that social connection that include young people from around the world. And so their response in many ways is driven by a global sensibility. Very different than the way many of us, certainly people of my generation, grew up. And so the question becomes, with that kind of understanding of who our young people are, then how do we support them? In my experience, most of the young people I have met are not snowflakes. They don't melt into a ball when confronted with different opinions than their own. They don't necessarily erupt into anger when they do. I have not met the young person that the moment you challenge them with something different than what they think, that they, as the media stereotype goes, can't deal with this, and then they erupt into a ball of frenzy and anxiety. It's a media stereotype, no more and no less. And I think we should treat it as such. I find that many of the young people I meet are incredibly, they're mature, they're well-informed, they're often driven by an imperative to address things that they think are wrong. They want to address problematic issues that are connected to different aspects of our society. And so in many of those ways, I find many of our young people inspiring. I may be something of a dreamer, or maybe I'm an idealist, or maybe something, but I think it is true. At TCNJ, I'm the dean, and I don't often get to teach classes. But with my assistant dean, I have had the pleasure of doing a class that's a first-year orientation class for all of our first-year students coming in. And this is about 170 young people. This year, of course, because of the year it is, it's been done mostly online. So I haven't had the opportunity to meet many of them face-to-face, which has been a shame. But one of the things that we do at the end of that first-year class in the fall semester is that we say to them, we're going to put you in groups, and you can pick any topic you want. Any topic you want. There is no restriction on it. We just want you to do one thing. We want you to pick a topic that you're passionate about, to show us why you're engaged in it, and to show us how you want us to engage with this topic. And in doing so, we want you to convey something that you think is really important about the topic you have chosen. And we got, I think, something close to 20 videos that were there. But the one that stood out was one done by a group of students who, it was surprising because I didn't know they would go there, and I didn't know that this is what they would end up doing. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you that video. It's relatively short if my technology will cooperate. And I would also like to then afterwards introduce you to one of the students, Haley, whom you heard me mention earlier. I would like to introduce you to her and have her tell you a little bit about what drove her and her colleagues to do this and what it was that they were trying to say. So let me see if I can get this to, I'm going to try to see if I can get it to full screen. Let's see if it will work. May the gods of technology be with us. Well, that was not quite the intent, but let's see. Okay.
Over the 4.54 billion years of the Earth's existence, it has gone through many changes. It has been through ice ages and greenhouse periods, both being extremely hot and cold. However, changes that took incredible amounts of time on Earth are now occurring rapidly. Why is that, you ask? Well, it's because of climate change and humans' impact on the Earth. Although it is really nice to have 70-degree weather in autumn, this is not necessarily normal. Climate change occurs when the Earth and atmosphere go through an energy change, primarily caused by the sun. More recently, humans have been contributing to and expediting this process. The Earth has previously taken 5,000 years to warm up 5 degrees Celsius. According to NASA, global temperature has increased by 2 degrees since 1880 and is still rising. Our Arctic ice minimum has been down by 13.1% per decade. Now, the Earth is predicted to warm up 2 to 6 degrees Celsius within this century, which is an incredible rate of 20 times faster. This change is caused by human behaviors such as burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and the burning of greenhouse gases. For example, driving a car burns fuels that contribute to climate change. That is why there has been such a race to create the perfect electric car. The Earth has a deadline. In about 7 years and 97 days, the Earth won't be habitable. Feel like you want to start being more conscious about climate change? Here are some things that you can do. Utilize reusable water bottles, bags, and containers. Use more renewable energy in your household. Invest in energy-efficient appliances. Make sure to unplug everything not in use. And actually eat the food that is in the fridge.
All right, and so I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to introduce Haley to everyone and say, Haley, tell us a little bit about what it is that drove you and your colleagues to do this when you could have chosen any topic in the world. And what was it that you hoped that you would be able to convey to your classmates? But before you do that, also tell us just a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Haley. I'm a student at the College of New Jersey. I'm actually going to be a junior next year, so I transferred to the College of New Jersey. And I'm majoring in interactive multimedia. First, I'd like to say thank you quickly to Dean Hall for asking me to be here tonight, and also just for a really inspiring and insightful semester. We were really encouraged the students to engage in conversations as active listeners and as people who use empathy, and also to participate in our communities as activists. And so for this project, when my group met for the first time, we almost immediately knew that we wanted to talk about climate change because it is an existential crisis that we are all facing, not just in our local community, but globally. As Dean Hall was saying, I guess the younger generations especially, we're really trying to engage with people around the globe. And since this is an issue that's really going to affect, younger generations, we wanted to talk about it. And with the last part of the video, we really wanted to encourage people, everyone, to make small changes in their lives, because they seem like very small changes that wouldn't have that much of an impact. But if we all collectively can make those small changes, we actually could create a big difference. I think it's often a misconception that, climate change is really an issue that's just on the shoulders of large corporations, but really everyone in our global community does have an impact on this issue. And we wanted to encourage other people to get involved and make a difference.
Thank you, Haley. Haley, thank you so much. Let me ask you this question. If for the other young people that may be on the call tonight, or for their parents or for their teachers, what would you like to say about what works for you and what works for your colleagues in terms of either encouragement or guidance as you set out to, in whatever way you can, make the world a better place, whether you do it through activism or, in this case, through art? What helps you? What doesn't help you?
I would say, as a student within the School of the Arts and Communication, part of the college, and my peers as well that worked on the project, we really tried to create a fully engaging experience for our viewers. So we tried to employ different types of communication to really make an impact on our viewers. So we wanted to include music and have our scripts and have, those capturing images. I think art and creative endeavors really do leave an emotional impact on people. And that has been really helpful for me personally, getting involved in things that I'm interested in and just becoming more of an activist. I think when someone feels something, they're more likely to act upon that to change. So yes, definitely the arts and creating emotional experiences for people is definitely what we were hoping to do.
Haley, thank you so much for being willing to join me here tonight, and hopefully you will stay on the call because I suspect there may be questions for you at the end when we stop. And if your parents are there and listening, I want to thank them too for lending you to us for a few moments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Hall.
So I wanted to have Haley on the call because here then is the third piece. So we've talked about the young people who are very visible, like the David Hoggs. I've talked about the young man who has been incredibly moving to me to watch his life because he was a part of my family, so to speak, Niall, and the impact that Niall had, even though he left us too soon. And you've seen Haley and her colleagues and the work that they do. Sort of three different categories of young people, talking about the ways in which they find different ways through their lives, through public activism, through art, to connect with us and to say we want to make a difference. So the question becomes, how do we help them make a difference? How do we provide the kind of context, the kind of encouragement, the kind of tools that will help them do what it is they say they want to do? And so what I'm going to spend some time for the next few minutes doing before we take questions is I'm going to become a college professor. I'm sorry. And I'm going to talk a little bit about communication, which is my field, and why I think some of the tenets of understanding communication become an incredibly important part in helping us understand how to work with young people on some of these issues. I'm gonna share my screen again for a short moment, but in sharing it, I am going to this time ensure that hopefully it does not. And it's not wanting to cooperate with me at the moment. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to see if Mike, if you can put your screen up, and then I'll go from there. So part of the issue has been that we sort of try to silence our young people by arguing that they're overly emotional, overly passionate. Thank you so much, Mike. And that they don't fully understand the issues. They want to be involved in cancel culture, and that this is in some ways, we want to tell them to sit down and learn a little more. It's partly because we disagree with them. So the question is, how do we engage in dialogue on different issues, grounding young people in the tenets of dialogue from a communication perspective? And I want to keep inspiring students to be involved in social movements. I spent 20 years at Villanova University before I came to the College of New Jersey, and I co-taught with colleagues a class called Multicultural Leadership. And in it, we taught students how to engage in activism in meaningful ways. And I think the tenets that we looked at were tenets that in many ways are important for what turned out to be activism on the campus, but I think is true for activism around environmental issues, is true around activism on general social justice issues across the board. So the next slide talks a little bit about what it means to understand communication. And if you look at this, I wanna argue that contrary to what we've been told, talk is not cheap and it's not harmless. It does not merely describe external reality, rather it is deeply implicated in the creation of this reality, right? When we speak something, when we say something, in some ways it brings it into being. It does that in part because a talented speaker can frame things for us in ways that create the very reality that is being discussed. So if you remember, our previous president often used the term fake news in a very particular way to describe opinions he didn't agree with. But fake news wasn't just something that he said. It wasn't just describing something in the media. In saying it, it also activated certain things. In saying fake news, it became a framing mechanism for how we understood news and how we understood its interpretation. In using that moniker, he wasn't just simply describing reality. In effect, he created the reality he sought to describe. Yes, in part because he was the president of the United States and he did have that bully pulpit. But that is also true in many of our lives. And what many of our young people understand is that how we use language and sensitivity to language becomes an incredibly important part in arguing for the kind of just world that many of them seek. And so the fights that we have about language that we dismissively refer to as political correctness often are fights that are worth fighting because language is consequential, because language is important, because language not just describes, but creates the meaning that it seeks to describe. On the next slide, I wanna talk about this thing called cancel culture. And cancel culture, if you'll go to the next slide, Mike, talks about the idea of a wrong word or a phrase that if you use it, you can lose your job, you can lose your show, and the idea is that you can't say anything. You can't say anything without people wanting to cancel you. First, I think we need to recognize that it is very important that sometimes these descriptions are media descriptions, no more, no less. Often when the media is describing some kind of controversy, they're often doing it through a shorthand, and the shorthand in many ways doesn't describe the full picture. But here is something that is important. We grow up hearing sticks and stones don't break my bones, or sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Not necessarily true. Think of the difference it makes in describing a human being when you use the word retarded and you use the word person with disability. That's not just a difference of political correctness. That's not just the difference of saying the right thing. Because centering person in person with disability implicates the way we treat the human being being described. Person with disability. The person is not the disability itself, which the term retarded conveys. That's not trivial. That's not incidental. That's not something that we can attribute merely to political correctness. It fundamentally changes how we understand and how we respond to the human being at the end of that description. And so my experience has been that often when we are among high school or college students who are arguing about the nuances of words and terms used, of course, yes, sometimes we go overboard. Of course, yes, sometimes there are protests or demonstrations that I look and I go, that could have been handled better. But we shouldn't lose the overall point that we are facing a generation that is calling us to account, not just in terms of how we construct the world physically, but how we construct the world socially, how we construct the world through communication, how we construct it through language, and how we construct it through culture. And so I'd like to throw some questions to us. Mike, if you'd scroll through 2 slides to asking ourselves these questions, right? As we think about environmental sustainability, the identity of it is shifting and changing. For years, the identity of the movement has been largely associated with white culture, the stereotypical media images, arguably, have been of white people birding and fishing and hiking. There have been a lack of images representing Black and brown communities engaged with nature, right? And that may be disputable. People may argue back and forth on that. The question is, though, as climate change is in the forefront of the movement and the identity of environmentalism and sustainability is shifting, we're realizing that there is a disproportionate impact on communities of certain demographics because many of these issues don't exist in a vacuum. And so the question becomes, how do we use language and how do we wrestle with talking about what these issues are in ways that make a difference? I remember having a wonderful conversation, and I think she's on the call tonight, Susan Haig. I remember having a wonderful conversation with Susan about just those issues, about how do we engage language? How do we engage young people? How do we use language in ways that communicates to broad groups of people and yet accurately describe what is happening? Susan, as always, is concerned, and I think rightly so, that the way we use language, we don't do it to short circuit some important understandings that then reframe what we're talking about in ways that are unproductive. And so her question is, and my question to us is, how do we then use language in ways that are inclusive and that bring people into the conversation rather than exile them from it? The next slide, Michael, if you would please ask the question, therefore, what are the experiences with students from a wide variety of demographics and their knowledge of sustainability, their commitment to change, the actions they're taking? How does the identity of the movement itself need to shift given the demographics of the wide variety of students who are becoming involved, and also the communities to whom we need to speak? How do we use language? How do we talk about? How do we describe these issues? How do we help students to use language in ways that will reach a wide variety of communities, some who may have never themselves have thought about being active around issues of the environment or climate, or who may think, oh, well, it's just for those people. How do we use language to do that? How do we use communication to do that well? Well, going back to where we started, I would like to suggest that apart from the fact that we need to use language carefully and thoughtfully, we call it inclusive language, right? This is what a lot of young people on college campuses say. Inclusive language is important. We use it to build up, not to tear down. But some of the more powerful terms of communication may not have to do with talking at all. On the next slide, you will see, as you go through each of them, 3 assertions. Number 1, ask more questions, make fewer assertions. As we interact with people who have different perspectives than we do, who see the world that differently than we do, asking questions is a powerful tool of getting their viewpoints, of seeing where they are, seeing what they think about. Next one is listening with interest and with empathy. Listening is hard to do because often when we listen, we equate listening with not speaking, or we equate it with a pause while we're formulating our own response to what the person is saying. It's just that we're not saying it out loud, and as soon as they're finished speaking, then we jump in and we say what we have to say, versus not responding, fully giving attention to what the person is saying and hearing what they have to say. And finally, in that list, share stories, not criticisms. And what I mean by that is some of the more powerful ways to reach people is to do it through story. Because once you start going into assertions and critiquing and getting into criticisms of discourse, we lose people. Stories are the more powerful ways of connecting as human beings, and it pulls all of these together. Because when we center listening, when we center questioning, and when we center telling stories, personal stories as well as others, it means that we have a more powerful opportunity to truly hear where the other person is and what they're talking about. And I'm not talking about some false sense of empathy. I'm talking here about a genuine interest in reaching across to hear the perspectives of people who are different than ours. Might this be, as we continue to mentor and groom and help our students or children, those who are in their communities, might these be perspectives that not only we model ourselves, but that we then also help them to acquire? I'm going to show you one more slide and then I'm going to stop sharing the screen. What it means is that in many ways, we ask questions for clarity, right? We unpack ambiguous statements or incomplete thoughts, which would be the first bullet. If you could go forward, Michael, thank you so much. We show engagement non-verbally. As someone is talking, make sure that we are looking at them, giving them signs of encouragement. And we also ask questions to help with focus. Sometimes people will go off of tangents, but sometimes questions can help us really focus in terms of what's going on. And the key piece, thank you, Michael, you can take that off the screen now. I appreciate it so much for jumping in. And the key piece of this is that overall, our task is it sounds so simple, and yet it is so profound. In this day of getting into each other and fighting with each other and wrestling with each other about meaning, about how we go forward, about what's important, it is important to argue and fight over some things. Some things are important. Often, the people that are leading the way for us are our young people. And if we're not careful, because we are frustrated by what they say, we may not have answers for what they say, or we don't like what they say, or we don't like how they describe the world that we think we have built for them. Often our defense is to dismiss them, to say it's political correctness, to silence them, to say they're a part of cancel culture. But what if we take them seriously? What if we work to treat them as intellectual equals? What if we really take their concerns seriously, not dismiss them? What if we set aside times and places to meaningfully listen to them in ways that allow them to say what they have to say? And what if more than that, we mentor them and encourage them? What if we model for them what it is that we hope that they will do for others? Ask questions. Listen with empathy. Share stories, back and forth. I have a wonderful friend and colleague at Villanova who, whenever we taught this course, she used this adage, and I've used it ever since with kudos and credit to Dr. Sherry Bowen, who teaches in the communication department at Villanova University. She took a well-known phrase that we heard a lot and used it very well for this situation. She said, "Do ask, don't tell. Do ask, don't tell." And I think it's a powerful way for us to model and to mentor and to help encourage our young people in activism around issues that have to do with climate and the environment, but also around issues of social justice across the board. I certainly hope that what you take away from hearing Haley, Niall, Amanda, David, all of the other wonderful young people that I've talked about are the exciting opportunities for the ways in which this younger generation is leading us forward. Maybe the adage is true. Maybe a child shall lead them. Maybe that's something we need to think about and take more seriously. Thank you very much. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to open it for any questions you may have, or for me, or for Haley, or tell us we're crazy. Well, tell me I'm crazy. Leave Haley out of it. She's fine.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, very much for your words of wisdom, and Haley as well. So if anyone has any questions right now, you can go ahead and put them in the chat and kind of pull some from there and see what's going on. While we're kind of monitoring that, I just want to say that this has been a great bookending of keynote speakers, Dr. Hall, because we had Melissa Miles on in the beginning of our conference, and she talked about, she told her story, just like you said, about growing up in Newark in the Ironbound, and as a young mother having to, come to terms with the fact that her son had asthma because of where they lived. And, I found your piece on when you said, people's perception that you can't have equity because you're not motivated, right? And validity of people when they're speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
You validate what they're saying. It just kind of came full circle to me, because a lot of people in these communities are not heard. Mm-hmm. They have these concerns. They're community activists, mm-hmm. and they're just dismissed and pushed aside, and we'll just build more stuff there, and it's just them. Right. So it's not a question, it's more of a statement. But I just wanted to say, it was, for me, those points came together, and it was great. It was great.
Thank you.
Wrap around. So a lot of people are agreeing with you to listen, ask questions as you describe. Reminder to slow down and be present was a great one from Pat Heaney.
Kelly, if it's okay, I'm going to jump in and ask Haley a question. Haley, do you see yourself continuing to use your art to bring environmental issues, to spread the environmental issues to others?
Certainly, that would be really great if I could continue to work on projects like this. I definitely am interested in multimedia projects, so with music and video and everything. I think it's really impactful. So if I could definitely, like, if I could be a part of the conversation, I would certainly love to be.
That's yes. And all of us are looking to you saying, we have so many projects that we have you work on, Haley. So you're, either of you, I guess your thoughts, and Haley, I don't know how many environmental courses you're taking at TCNJ or Dr. Hall. But I guess in our line of work, sometimes language gets a little tricky. With some of our scientific terms are a little antiquated. For example, when we talk about plants that cause problems, we call them, well, we used to call them alien invaders, or they're invasive. And sometimes, especially older kids, kind of take that language personally, like we're talking about them, when in fact we're not. We're talking about the plants. Any words of advice, words of wisdom, thinking about, our language and science language, how we could, I don't know, make it more inclusive, I guess?
So I'll jump in quickly, and then I'll throw to Haley in case she has any questions or comments. The more powerful adage, whenever I teach public speaking, one of the first things we teach students is common ground. That is, before you can persuade anyone, the person has to feel that you are like them, that you share common ground with them, that they could see you. We've often heard this term. One of the surveys that is often done with presidents when they begin, or as they're beginning, is this someone I feel I could sit and have a beer with? And the reason that social science question is asked is because it gets to this idea of common ground. And so the question of how we use language and how we communicate with it is often the question of not necessarily just what you say, but what is it that people hear, right? How do we get the kind of feedback that gets from communities? What is it that they hear when they hear the language that we use? Because if you're an educator, I'm sure you experience it, but even as a parent, you experience it too, and I certainly do. You say something to a group, to a class, it comes back to you in ways totally different than what you intended. And so that piece of speaking so others will understand what it is that you meant is an important piece. Haley, from your perspective, I don't know if you have anything to add in terms of how do we use language to communicate with people on these issues when they're so technical and could be potentially alienating?
Sure, I definitely agree with what you just said, Dean Hall. And I think especially with environmental issues and climate change, just making sure that or really pushing the fact that, we're all going through this together. It's not something that's just affecting a small portion of people, and we have to be willing to have conversations and not just lecture, be willing to answer questions, be really open and inviting to any engagement, really, to get more people involved. And also, another student from our group has joined the call. Hallie, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Hallie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I know Hallie was planning to be on the call too, but she had to be somewhere else. Yeah. And so she's just joining us. I know we're near the end, but could you just tell us quickly, what do you do? Who are you? What do you do?
Just in general, just like a nice synopsis.
Yes, but particularly at TCNJ.
Okay. So I'm a music major at TCNJ. I am a freshman transfer because TCNJ is amazing, better opportunities. And I'm currently taking this semester off because I have Army training for the reserves. Wow. So I'll be back in the fall.
Right. Hallie, we had an opportunity to show the film that your group made earlier, and so we were engaging in some ways around it. And Haley did a wonderful job of talking through what was the impetus behind doing the film and so forth. can you, in like a minute to 2 minutes, just sort of talk about your perspectives of doing the film and sort of what drove you to do it?
Yeah, so we tried to pick a topic that was super talked about and like one that we all could find common ground with and find different pieces to put together. And climate change was just the best one because that's always going to be important. That's a continuous work. That's not just one person, it's everyone. And for me, I looked at it as the Earth has a deadline. And at the time, New York had just presented the countdown clock of like when it's all gonna go down and when it's gonna be inhabitable. And that in my head, initially, I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm only 20. I was like, and this is the deadline. I was like, this is more important than I think any other topic because at the time, not to get political in any way, but we were pulled out of a lot of things that could have helped the environment. We weren't back in the Paris Agreement, and we weren't looking at the big picture of the world has a deadline, much like every organism on it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Harry. One of the things we've been saying this afternoon is that students like yourself and Haley have become part of the front lines of leading us to think about these issues and sometimes pushing us forward on these issues. And so we thank you for your activism. We thank you for your leadership. And we are particularly grateful that you're willing to do it through art. Susan has a question.
Oh, I do. And thank you so much, Dean Hall, and congratulations, Haley. And so it's Haley and Hallie, is that right? Pretty good, pretty good. Just a quick question about the brand word that you are using to see if you can answer quickly. So climate change has become the buzzword. It's just used incessantly, and it conflates cause and effect because it can mean actually the warming, and it can mean the impacts of the warming, and it can be the natural fluctuations over millennium that really aren't. So do you think about that when you use it, or are you just using it because everybody uses it? That's the first question. And the other question is it an issue, or is it this predicament and phenomenon that we better get ourselves out of?
That's a question for me.
For both of you.
Okay. So
one for each.
I use it just because that's the science name. That's usually what we're all calling it from a science basis. And it is changing. Our climate is changing. So actively, for me, in my brain, it makes sense. And what was the second question? I'm like, what was the second part?
Well, we often call it an issue because the news media deals in issues. Issues means points of contention. But if you're actually talking about global warming, it's kind of this big phenomenon and predicament because, yes, we're losing our living environment and we're not doing anything about it. But when it's called an issue, it sounds like just a point of debate. So do you think of it as an issue, or is it bigger than that?
I think it's an issue, but I also don't think it's an issue that can be changed by opinion. It's a science issue. It's like an actual concrete issue that everyone's putting into it. Because I know that it's become a political stance. Because some people don't think it's happening. If you can't see it, it's not happening. And the fact of the matter is that you can't see it, but there's science behind it. And you can visibly see the statistics between the world's getting warmer. Like 2020 was the hottest year on record, like everywhere. So it is kind of an issue, but also in the comments with saying it's a crisis, it is, because it seems to be never ending. We can't seem to get to a good place to keep progressing to make it better.
So that then you've just put your finger on is a human problem.
Yeah.
So it's more than science. It's a problem of the way we're working as humans, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Haley, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's quite sad that it has become a political issue and that we can't look at science as a whole as facts, that it's, global warming is being debated when there is clear evidence that this is a major problem that we do need to we need to change our behaviors because it is an existential crisis. This is not something that we can easily get out of at this point, but we can still make change. And it's kind of discouraging, with the current political atmosphere, but I think if we can start having conversations instead of arguments, and actually employ empathy and listen to the other side of the argument and, present our facts and just not jump right away to fight someone, I think that we will improve the fight to save our and hopefully keeping my fingers crossed.
And just to build on what Dean Hall said, that the reason, yes, he mentioned civic stories being sensitive about language, because we want to find our way into a space where we can solve the problem. So once we realized that the term climate change had been politicized, just the words themselves, we thought, let's not pretend that they haven't been. They simply have been politicized. So English language is very rich. So we avoid that term just because it does shut down conversation. Once it shuts down conversation. Use other words. So that's why we've used the term sustainability, and global warming is a closer take on the problem. And then ecological restoration is something that Michael has used a lot, and regenerative, and of course caring for the earth is something that that speaks to the heart. Everybody loves the land where they are or where they grew up. So caring for the earth is one of those larger phrases where people can get on common ground. So our suggestion is get away from the brand. It's been handed to you by the news media. Everybody uses it, but it doesn't get you where you want to go, and that is solving the problem. But that's just throwing out there.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Susan. Thank you.
Yes.
I love this dialogue across
I know, this is fantastic. And Mike, this is making me think that this would be a great continuation for an ANJEE Zoom in our future coming series that we're putting together after the conference. So I would love to continue the conversation, but I'm smelling dinner. So Mike, you want to wrap up?
Absolutely. It just so happens a mentor of mine taught me years ago the difference, speaking of language, between a teacher and an educator, right? The etymology of teach is to give. It's to fill with information. To educate is to bring forth from. Dr. Hall, you are an educator. So we really appreciate your time here today and express our gratitude for the wonderful work you're doing and imparting your wisdom on us. How fortunate for the students that enter through your doors or appear on your screens, and how fortunate for us. ANJEE actually will be embarking on more youth outreach and advocacy in the upcoming year. So Hallie, you may get an email from ANJEE, and Dr. Hall, you too. Thank you so much. And as we wrap up, just a quick couple of reminders. Tomorrow is our final day of this incredible 2-week virtual conference. Join us at 6:30 p.m. to honor friends in the field that will be receiving awards. In particular, I do want to say Pat Heaney, past president, is going to be hosting the EE and Excellence Awards. We have 5 incredible awardees, including Tanya Osnowich, who will be the recipient of the Pat Kane Lifetime Achievement Award. So please be there to help us celebrate Tanya and the other EE changemakers in our state. Again, thank you so much to our conference sponsors, PSEG, New Jersey Natural Gas, and our anonymous donor for making this free and accessible to everyone this year. And thank you to our workshop sponsor, New Jersey Clean Energy Program. Again, Dr. Hall, Hallie, and everybody that joined us, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon.
Thank you.
And you may unmute everybody and let them hear your applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great work.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful evening.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
30 tomorrow.